It's 8 o'clock, and this is TV Cogeco's The Issue. I'm Mark Carr, and my co-host tonight, Casey Cosgrove. Casey is an instructor at the University of Guelph and community activist, whatever that means. And tonight we're going to be talking about what the trustees of the Halton District School Board have decided, and that's the closure of Pearson and Bateman School. And with us in this half is Lisa Bull from Bateman. And in the second half of the show, we are going to be talking with Amy Collard and Lisa. And Amy is the Ward 5 trustee at the Halton District School Board. And the single vote against the closures. Am I correct, Lisa? Yep. Okay, now if our audience wants to get involved, you can go to Twitter, hashtag the issue. Let us know your comments, questions, let us know what you think. Or go to Facebook, The Issue. And our social media guru Kim Slonwhite from ClearPath Media will answer those. We'll put them on the air. And if you're old-fashioned and want to use the telephone, you can call 905-333-6088. And so that's the introduction, Casey, to the show. Now, you were at many of these meetings leading up to the final vote. So what did you get from those meetings?
I was at some. I didn't. I was a delegate for Nelson High School. I mentioned before I was a graduate of Bateman or Lord Elgin, as it was back in the day, and worked at General Brock. So these South schools have been part of my community since I was born, and have an affinity for all of the schools in Burlington, just with that history. But watching this, for me, what did I get out of this? Just as a community member and someone who was relatively engaged, I still don't understand what happened, and I've been reading everything. I don't. No one's made sense of this for me. We'll get into this later, but it's not about money. But then some interesting new ideas are proposed, and well, that might get more expensive. So it is about money, and then it's about student placement.
It's always about money.
And it's about course schedules, and I guess for me, having Lisa on tonight was key. Because I think that the Bateman story was a very strong one. And Pearson, I have a statement from Pearson too, they were invited. But the Bateman story, if you saw those delegations, if that didn't change any votes, what were we doing? Why were any of us delegating? If that didn't have any effect, were we just wasting our time? So I thought one last show. Thank you for allowing me as a member of this community to do one more show on this, and I'm happy to be here. So.
Well, Casey, we have had a lot of comments and questions on our Facebook page and in the community about this issue, and we just thought that if you're willing to do it again, then this is the show that we do again. And Lisa, how are you feeling after the vote? The 10-to-1 vote. Amy Collard was the only one that voted to keep the schools open.
She was the only one who voted in favor of keeping Bateman open. The vote was,
yes.
There were two other trustees who voted to keep Pearson open. Okay. But yeah, Amy was the lone trustee who voted against closing Bateman.
And how did that make you feel after all the work that you had put into justifying the continuation of Bateman? How did you feel after that vote?
Well, it was, we have had, first of all, the Bateman community has been stunning. I think in a lot of ways, our community surprised a lot of people. I think they came together in this spectacular way. and fought like I don't think anyone expected the community to fight. And we have had a really powerful Facebook group that has been our community, that has been our opportunity to come together, to share ideas, to share information. When I left that night, so the trustees meeting didn't end until after midnight, and you know, it went very long for some crazy reasons, which perhaps we can talk about. But you know, I got home and I sat down and I thought, you know, I feel like I need to say something to our community just about what just happened. And really, it was a roller coaster. I felt obviously incredibly sad, just really sad for the students, first and foremost. I felt incredibly angry that, you know, as you were saying, Casey, you know, we worked so hard as a community, and I think that we presented powerful, compelling, emotional, cogent arguments. I think we gave great...
And logical.
Yeah, which is sadly lacking, I think, from a lot of this process. And to do that, and to really feel, honestly, like it fell on deaf ears. And I think that's kind of what you're alluding to, that it felt like they heard nothing. So disgusted, again, a range of all of those.
So is it your feeling that this entire process is just put out there for public relations and not really to gain any information or creative ideas to allow the schools to stay open? Is that your opinion, that this is all for show?
So I'm going to say that when I started this process, pretty naive, thought it was an exercise of engagement. And even throughout the process, I think I wanted to believe that it was about engaging the communities, engaging the schools. I have to say today where I sit, I don't know if I'd say it was for PR, you know, because I don't know that there's been a lot of good PR that's come out of it. Was it an exercise because they had to march through it? Maybe. I think that there were so many, when we started the process, on the PAR committee, for example, we were told that this was an issue, low enrollment in some schools that had been going on for a long time, and that really, as hard as it was, the board had come to this decision that they needed to launch this process. That it wasn't about money.
Which is
right.
A process that the provincial government mandates suggests that the school boards go through?
The provincial government, and Amy's going to be able to talk to you more about that, but the provincial government does have this process, and it is a very prescriptive process for running a program accommodation review. The Halton District School Board has their own version of that, so it falls within the parameter, but they have their guidelines. So there's a very specific set of circumstances that need to happen, you know, when they trigger it, when they launch it. It is a very prescriptive process throughout. So, you know, do I think it was all for show? No. Do I think that we...
You mean you really feel, after all those good ideas,
yes,
all of that work that you put into Bateman for Bateman to remain open, that they didn't accept it?
Yeah.
And you're okay with that?
Oh gosh, I'm not okay.
No,
I hope that's not what you heard me say, because I
okay.
was not saying I'm okay with it.
Saying
No.
she didn't think it was for show or PR.
Yeah, I don't think it was for
Then
PR.
What do you think it was for, if they didn't take those suggestions seriously?
So, and maybe it's semantics. Maybe we're saying the same thing. So, I think it was about money. I do think it was about money. I think the reason that they voted to close schools was about money. That's not what they said it was about. They said it was about enhancing the student experience. I do not think that was that part of it? Maybe. Is that some piece of it? Perhaps. That's not the overarching. I do not believe that any longer. Although that is what those of us in the PAR committee were told from the onset. This is not about money. Don't consider that. This is about the student experience. This place now, after what's happened, and when I look at it, and when I look at what else is happening around the province, because we're not unique, this is happening in many other places, I think there's a very clear financial reason it's happening.
But just if I can, Casey, with the process that you undertook and the school board undertook, and they said it wasn't about money.
Right.
What makes you think that ultimately it was?
Well, there was a story we saw yesterday or today, I think, about the Ottawa School District. So they just were given, in fact, I believe Minister of Education Mitzi Hunter went to Ottawa to deliver the great news to the school district there, that she was, that her ministry was giving them $18.3 million. That school district had just gone through 2 PAR processes where they had closed a high school, I believe maybe a couple of elementary schools. I took some notes because I was so surprised by it. 6 elementary schools and 1 high school were closed or consolidated. So they closed schools, and in fact, 1 school was closed that was almost at its capacity. So it wasn't one of these underutilized schools. It was almost at capacity, but they moved things around and they moved kids into another school. So similar to what we do, they describe that process as bruising, which I think is a kind description, but that's what it feels like. So they go through all this torture, this turmoil in Ottawa. They close this, and then the school district gets $18.3 million for renovations and consolidation. They're going to build some fancy new gyms. They're going to, renovate some of the existing buildings.
But that's good. That's what the closure of schools should generate some money so that they can put those into other schools in the area.
So what
Isn't that, don't you think that's a good thing?
Not in Burlington, I don't.
Oh no, I meant in
well, and
Ottawa.
I don't know enough about the story in Ottawa, but I can, the parallel that I'll make in Burlington is that's exactly the argument that the trustees who voted against or who voted for closing Burlington gave. Look, we're going to close Bateman and we're going to move all those students to Nelson and we're going to build this fancy, spectacular new magical school. And our argument was, why do you need to? You've got an existing building that has all the facilities in it. It has taken, 5, 6, 7 years to build a very specific culture there that supports the diversity of the students there. You've got this there. Why would you spend, conservatively $12 or $14 million on renovating when you've got this existing school in place? Why would you do that? That is not logical to me.
No, I agree, and there were some ideas brought forward. Obviously, there wasn't time to, and again, I'll go back to my point. There was no time for creativity here. I've talked to some people, community leaders. Where was this point in time in this process? I'm not talking just from the time they, but where was anybody able to, people that are pretty engaged in their community, for me, Southeast Burlington, I never heard of, hey, we might have to close schools in a year, get together as a community and figure it out, because there was none of that. It was scrambling, and Bateman being put on the block at the last minute. Like, this thing was set up, this decision clearly, and when you saw the votes last week, I'm sorry, the decision was made right at the start. This whole process was a waste of time, and so there were a couple like this dual campus idea. Now it was, it wasn't worked out fully in any way, shape, or form. But there were
with more time, it could have been.
Maybe, but
saying.
immediate. There was no time to actually go out and seek support from the city, from other folks. There was never any time to do that, and so when it was proposed last week as a possibility, the response was it that it would cost too much for busing or something? Didn't they go back to the busing?
there was a
Casey, we'll get to that. We're just going to take a break right now, and then when we come back, I'd like to get further into that issue. So stay with us. We'll be right back after these messages. And welcome back to The Issue here on Cogeco TV. I'm Mark Carr with co-host Casey Cosgrove, and our guest in this portion of the show is Lisa Bull from representing the Bateman community. And Casey, I interrupted you, so you go from here.
No, that's okay. I'm going to switch gears anyway. We can get into more about the time for creativity with maybe when Amy comes
Okay.
on. Rory Nissan, who was part of the Safe Pearson community, was invited. He's in LA on business. Viewers might remember, a very articulate young man, former Pearson student. He shared a statement from the Safe Pearson group today. I want to read it. The Safe Pearson team was obviously very disappointed with the decision of the Halton trustees last week to close Pearson High School. Though as parents of students and alumni, many of us had some kind of stake in the outcome. Our disappointment doesn't come from just students having to switch schools. On the contrary, our disappointment stems from witnessing a perversion of a process through which the board's administration and trustees went out of their way to ignore evidence, data, and facts that supported Pearson High School remaining open. Very strong words. Several trustees must now wear this decision as a badge of dishonor. This is his words. Having voted to close a high school in a growing community that's projected to meet the board's own targets for utilization. And he did go on to say that they're not disappointed with all trustees. We were particularly disappointed in 3 of 4 Burlington trustees, one who promised during the last election that I will not support closing schools. That was one trustee. Another used alternative facts regarding the number of students needed in the school, and were most disappointed in a Burlington trustee who waited until the last minute to declare her support for a threatened school in her ward, whose defense of Pearson was so weak as to be counterproductive, who provided an alternative solution at the table so ill-advised it was ruled out of order. Again, his words.
A solution on the fly.
Yeah.
At about midnight.
And is the first politician in living memory to give a concession speech before the vote had been cast. I don't know what that means. Her capitulation may have cost Pearson the votes it needed to stay open. The Safe Pearson team in the community is looking at all available options to seek a change in this decision, including administrative review. So I can tell you that, of the 4 trustees they talked about, we don't need to get into naming names, I don't think. But
if you want.
well, our guest tonight is not one that they're upset with. So,
Okay.
So
All
yeah.
right, I'm going to interrupt you, Casey, and remind our audience you can get a hold of us at Twitter, #TheIssue, on Facebook, The Issue, or 905-333-6088, and we have a call. And the caller, are you there, caller? Cheryl, are you there?
I am. Yes, I am. My name is.
We can't hear her in the control room.
Hello, I'm here.
So
Hello.
we'll get back to Cheryl as soon as the control room just does some manipulation back there. So I'll let you continue, Casey, with that statement from Rory. And what did you think about that statement?
Well, those are strong words. There's hurt. There's no question. There's hurt. I think there was surprise that all of this, as we've gone over and over, that all of this fell on deaf ears. But all I'll say, Mark, to keep things moving is the process. There's so many questions about the process and not understanding and not being heard.
Okay, from your perspective, who determines the process? Is that provincially mandated, or I can't imagine it's a Halton District School Board that designs the process. So should we be talking to Eleanor McMahon, for example, or?
I'd like to ask Amy this when she comes, and the reason is it's not, that's a process question of how this all was rolled out, but I can speak to from the time that they named schools in their target. This was not, Lisa said it, this was not community engagement. That's what I did for a living. This was the furthest thing from community engagement that I've seen. It's my first kind of opportunity to do it relating to schools. But Mark, I don't know. We had one trustee. Everything I followed, it seemed that one trustee was really listening to their constituents. And I'm not throwing anyone else under the bus, but it's just been clear if you go on social media that people felt really not listened to.
But 10 to 1 is an overwhelming endorsement to close both schools.
It is.
So what would you say to those trustees in Oakville and Milton and Halton Hills who felt that the staff report and the closure of those two schools was an important thing to do for the overall student community?
So, there's the polite response, and then the real response, which I want to say is, why weren't you listening? Why did you not show leadership? And I think that for me is, again, it feels illogical to me, because I think, Rory's statement, I couldn't agree more. They were given facts and solutions and options, and I think that they chose a path of least resistance. I think that they did listen to the director in a way that it just seemed almost like blind trust or blind faith. I mean, clearly, the director and his staff are educators, and they are not dummies. So I'm not suggesting that. But you had communities coming forward. And it really, honestly, both Pearson and Bateman communities, we weren't coming forward saying, don't close our schools, this is mean. We were coming forward saying, we think there are other ways to address the problem. There are other ways to solve this. Give us an opportunity to share those concepts with you, and at least take some time to consider them. I do not think they considered them for long enough. I don't think they considered them in a meaningful way. As Casey has said, once the PAR process was launched, it is a very prescriptive, almost straitjacket process. And I feel that the board, because they did not want it to be able to be overturned through review, I think they followed very, very cautiously through it. And I think there was a fear of any deviation, any pause to go, you know what? Those communities are onto something. Let's pause this down. Let's look at this. Let's explore it. I think there was fear of what that might do long term. I just feel that if they'd shown leadership as a group of trustees, I think Amy, and I'm not just saying that because she's here, she's the only one who showed leadership, who was willing to stand up and say, no, there's some other things we need to look at. Let's look at them. That, in my estimation, this is your field. I'm talking about leadership. She's the only one who showed any. I think they were afraid. I think they were fearful. They lacked courage. They took the easy way.
Those are pretty strong words.
Oh, I'm just getting started.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no,
all right.
I mean,
so I won't stop you. Continue.
Well, and not only that, so I think it's one thing to sit back and be passive and go along and say, okay, this is what he recommended, we're going to go with that. I sat there last week and I watched a trustee actively go against creativity. I watched a Burlington trustee who ran on the platform of, I will not close schools.
Leah Reynolds.
Yes.
I'm mentioning because that's what she ran on
She
and
did.
was elected.
She
so
did.
that's fair game to
It is
mention
fair game.
her name.
Absolutely, I believe she needs to be held accountable for the fact that she did not keep her word. She did not live up to her promise. Not only that, she went out of her way to shut down Amy, who was bringing forward alternate motion, a creative opportunity, something worth looking at. Leah went out of her way to say, no, that shouldn't be allowed here. She used rules of order. She challenged the chair.
I also heard that someone in the gallery was texting her. Could you elaborate on that a little
I
bit?
sure could. I sat behind someone who was texting her.
And names is fair?
A sitting council person.
Sitting member of
City
Council.
Sat texting.
Marianne Mead Ward.
Maybe. Sat texting Leah things like, don't say that, vote against that. Leah, simply say this, challenge that. Word for word, coaching her what to do and what she was doing. So the fact that she's coaching her aside, I mean, I think that's problematic for a whole host of reasons. But the fact that, again, this is a sitting councilwoman who said, I want a ban on all school closures. I don't think any school should be closed. Who's now actively trying to shut down a trustee
who
who's
wants
trying to keep them open.
And I wasn't there, I didn't see that, but I think that if you stand back, this process also started pitting people against each other. I mean, that I heard about that. That's but now you have Central and Bateman and people. So like this whole process put the community, once once schools are targeted, put us in the position of having to fight or bicker with each other.
But we didn't do that. But
our
schools didn't do that.
But we kind of, because this whole process never allowed for community to get together. It, there was some concern about Bateman coming to Nelson, and so it just didn't allow. It seems so tight.
It wasn't collaborative.
It wasn't collaborative at
No.
all. So things like that happen, and if you have a sitting counselor doing that to someone sitting there in a formal meeting talking about closing schools, so
That brings up questions that both trustee and the counselor will have to answer.
it didn't change the decision, because I still think day one, once the director wrote this report, their ears were turned off. Like it was,
So you feel that the director went into this process, as you say, with a predetermined idea about what schools were going to close, and
it was in
held.
his report. It was in his report, but it was clear during and that night that no one was going to challenge that except for one trustee.
Person. And here's the interesting thing about
Okay, we just got about a minute.
Okay,
So.
it's more than a minute's worth of interesting, but the interesting thing is that the director's report and the recommendation to close Bateman cited that it was that this is an area where the population is declining. But here's what's interesting is that the problem at Bateman is not a declining population. Bateman has half a feeder school, half an elementary school feeding into it. Pineland, which used to provide Bateman with students, went complete French immersion last year. Those students all go to Nelson now. The only school that partially feeds Bateman is Frontenac. So the issue isn't that the population necessarily is changing, it's that the HDSB made decisions.
Halton District School Board.
Sorry, Halton District School Board made decisions before that impact the population of Bateman.
And Pearson.
And Pearson, exactly. It's the same
choked off both
situation.
schools.
Yeah, choke them up.
And
so is that coincidence, or was that something that is this part of a longer term plan that we were too naive to see?
And we'll just take a break right now, and we'll come back, and maybe we can ask a couple of those questions to Amy Collard, the Ward 5 trustee, who was the only one to vote 10 to 1, the only one to vote in favor of keeping Bateman open. So we'll be back after these messages here on The Issue. I'm Mark Carr. And welcome back to The Issue. I'm Mark Carr with co-host Casey Cosgrove. And Casey, we've got Amy Call joining us, Ward 5 trustee at the Halton District School Board. Amy, thank you so much for having the courage to come on to talk about this issue. We had asked the chair to come on, we'd asked other trustees to come on, and we'd asked the director of education to come on. So we had put it out there to a variety of people, and we thank you for taking us up on the offer.
Thank you for inviting me.
Okay. And we now have Cheryl back on, so we'll just interrupt our discussion for just a moment and let Cheryl go ahead. And you've got a question, Cheryl, about overcrowding. So go ahead and ask.
Okay, hi guys. My name's Cheryl Deluct. I'm a former park member representing Lester B. Pearson High School, and we put our blood and sweat into trying to save that school for the last 6 months. So I'm completely heartbroken to hear of the short-sighted decision by the trustees to voting to close Lester B. Pearson High School. They did not fix the overcrowding at Hayden. In fact, there are still 12 portables sitting in that parking lot, which is a health and safety issue. And I can speak for that because my son plays football there. And you can't find parking because the portables have overtaken the parking lot. So the short-sightedness of Stuart Miller to close not one, but 2 schools in Burlington, and we're still looking at a school with 130% overcapacity with 7 feeder schools, and Pearson was down to 1.5, and I know Lisa said that. They robbed those schools of feeder schools. So I really do think they set us up for failure many, many years ago, and I am spitting venom right now as to why they would have destroyed Burlington. And I do want to thank Amy. Amy, you were the one and only trustee that had the courage to speak up against Miller. I certainly want to thank you for that. But as an emerge nurse, and I said this in my delegation, I really wish that the Halton District School Board could have taken a momentary pause, which means a pause for 3 to 5 years with a wait and watch approach. And they would have seen their students coming up, because the houses are selling, the elderly are moving out, and who are moving in? But young families that need schools. But you have robbed Burlington, and Miller has destroyed Burlington. And yeah, I'm a pretty disengaged parent after this whole fiasco called the PAR. It was flawed from the beginning, and I sat there watching the trustees, and I am so angry right now. And Amy, you were the one and only trustee, so I certainly want to thank you for having that courage to speak up for all the students in Burlington.
And we thank you, Cheryl, for those comments. Amy, what do you think about what Cheryl has mentioned and what Lisa has talked about in the first part of the show?
I know this decision was difficult for every single trustee around the table. We engaged in many conversations, telephone conversations, board table conversations with one another, talking about the possibilities, and I know that even for myself, there were some of the items on the that we voted on that night that I decided my vote while I was sitting at the table, and I expect there were other trustees who also decided their vote while they were sitting at the table. I don't.
After hearing all the
after
input
hearing
from the delegations,
every last bit of input. I can't speak for how anyone else made their decision. I can't speak for how anyone else voted. I can only speak for myself. And I struggled with this process from the very beginning. Is very prescriptive, as Lisa said, and we had to follow certain guidelines that were put out by the ministry, one of which was that we had to name an option in order to engage a PAR. And so the director picked option 19. He felt that was the best starting point for a PAR. When he went from community to community explaining that we were about to engage in a PAR, some schools had more engagement than others, and that was because they were named. I don't think there were very many parents at all from Bateman who were showing an interest at the beginning because they weren't named and because Bateman is a school that has many, many regional programs.
And it's
Yeah.
very unique in the
It's a
system.
very unique school. And because of that, I don't think that they were overly engaged until they realized that they were going to ultimately be named as the
Is
school.
that when Central came off the
No.
list?
Well, as it got
Yeah.
closer to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, when the director made his final recommendation, when that came out to the public on April the 21st, that was when the Bateman community realized how serious this was.
Okay. Now we have a tweet from a gentleman in, I believe he's from Hamilton. And control room, can we put that up on the screen? At the expense of kids who must now go 2 school miles away, a decision is
The first one, the school closures in Burlington are nothing more than land developers trying to capitalize on the land at the expense of kids who must now go to 2 schools or to schools miles away. The decision is a disgrace. Shame on the school board. But to that, I would say, apart from the conspiracy theorists out there, and maybe with good reason to think that, the process. You can't. Let's leave that stuff alone because that doesn't involve the kids. That doesn't. This just where, like, so Amy, where someone like me who's pretty engaged. I didn't have a child at risk. I delegated for Nelson, but my son is graduating, so I didn't really have I have a daughter that's coming, but doesn't matter to me where she goes to school. But why do I feel, as a member of the community, why do I feel like there's something not right has happened? It's not about Bateman closing, it's about this process. I've lived in South Burlington my whole life, and it just seems in the blink of an eye, in such a short amount of time, without being engaged. I mean, that's the way I feel. What are your thoughts just on the process generally? I know you had to follow certain things, but just generally the process.
Well, the guidelines that are set down by the ministry are very prescriptive, and our board took those guidelines and designed our own policy, and we had very little wiggle room with what we could do with that. We had to make sure that we included all of the elements that were in the guidelines from the ministry, and carry out our process according to those guidelines.
Well, but was there any time in there to engage leaders in the community for ideas? Like, I know you had to go through, but was there any opportunity in there in those guidelines and that policy to say, hey, let's take a little bit of time and go see if we can drum up some ideas, if there are other solutions? Was there anything that could have been built in there, in your opinion?
I believe we might have been able to build something like that in there, but it wasn't part of the process. And because it wasn't part of the policy and not part of the guidelines, there was a reluctance to do anything that wasn't in the guideline or the policy, because it being so prescriptive, stepping outside of the lines might have created problems in terms of, was it following the process?
Can I ask you a question, Amy? We've heard that the PAR group was told that this is not about money. Lisa now thinks it was a prime mover of this decision. Where does the money go if the schools are sold off to, and I understand Catholic School Board, city, and there are a number of issues that you have to go through. When it is finally sold, where does that money go? Does it stay here with the Halton District School Board, or does that money move down the QEW to University Avenue in Queen's Park?
No, that money is retained in an account called the Proceeds of Disposition, and it must be spent on capital expenditures of the board.
Okay, and I really appreciate you you clearing that up.
It's not for new builds. It's only for renovations and repairs and those kinds of things. And the money that we spend from that account has to be approved by the ministry as well.
Oh, okay. So as we move forward with that potential money being put into that account, is there work to be done at other schools that is going to deplete that account down?
I can't really speak to that. I know that just yesterday, I believe, there was an announcement from the province that they are investing over $1 billion in renovating schools. So I don't know what portion of that will come to Halton. We had quite a bit of money given us last year for the same reason. So it's not that we would ever not have a way of spending it, because some of our schools are quite old, and bringing all of the schools up to AODA standards, getting air conditioning into all of the schools. It's a huge cost, because not all of the schools would have the hydro capacity for that. There are a lot of expenses. Just replacing a roof is a huge expense, and we have over 100 schools. So the money that we get from the ministry for that, I don't know what it will be this year, but we got quite a windfall last year. So I don't know that the proceeds of disposition would be used right away.
Okay.
I just wanted to go back to the conversation about the process, because I think that's one of the things that stymies me. And I'm looking at you because you're beside me, not because I would need you to answer this, but you talked about, perhaps there was possibility, there might have been room in the PAR process to engage the community, that could have potentially been there, could have happened before the PAR was called, but it didn't. And I think that's one of the things that has me banging my head, is that there's been so much protection of process at the expense of students. That's my experience of it, is that everyone, and that's been frustrating as well, trying to engage others in the process, like our MPP, who has supported in some ways, but has been very reluctant to step on toes in the process. The city has been kept and has chosen to stay outside of the process. It's all been about everybody just being so respectful of this process. And I think the end result
is flawed.
The process is flawed, and process be damned. Like, should we not be working with the community and really figuring out the best solution? It's not logical
and
to
maybe
me.
that's a question for Amy. If you can't go outside of the process and integrate some of your own ideas from the Halton District School Board, community ideas, and so on, that doesn't seem like very much of a process that allows input from the community.
Well, I would say that there are a couple of things that I would like to see change in the ministry guidelines that would allow us to make changes at the school board level. I have discussed this with the MPP, and she's very much aware of my concerns about the guidelines. This is the first PAR.
And she's a cabinet minister as well.
Yes.
That's Eleanor McMahon.
Yes, and she was very helpful to me throughout this process. But yeah, I believe this is the first time we've had a PAR in many, many years. I think it's about 8 years since we've had a PAR in our board. And so it's my first time as a trustee going through a PAR. And being that it is a brand new process, since it was our first time going through it, now we have a chance to look at our policy and, without straying from the ministry guidelines, see what we can do with our policy to make it more collaborative or maybe less restraining.
Okay, and I appreciate those comments, Amy. We're going to take a break right now, and but I did want to say just before we do take the break that I am very impressed with you coming on the show, that no one else would come on the show to answer these questions. They haven't been easy questions, but I certainly do appreciate that, and I know Casey and Lisa appreciate it as well. So stay tuned. We'll be right back here on The Issue. I'm Mark Carr. And welcome back to The Issue. I'm Mark Carr. We've got Casey Cosgrove, co-host, and Amy Collard, the Ward 5 trustee from the Halton District School Board, and Lisa Bull from the group at Trying to Save Bateman from closure. We have been talking about the closure of the two schools here in Burlington, Pearson and Bateman. Casey, there's been a lot said about the process, and I guess that's a little frustrating for me because I never know what the process is and how it can be changed if it's such a bad process.
I think, first of all, in terms of the other trustees, the director, I asked them, I gave not a lot of notice, so I want to be fair to them. I didn't give a lot of notice to come on the show, but I understand why some might not want to, and some may have had other commitments, so I just wanted to make that clear. I don't know the process. All I know is...
But you were involved in it.
Well, to me, it's a communication thing too. To me, I don't know. There's been this movement of things. I really don't understand why these two schools are closing. I mean, I've read the reports, everything. I don't get it. As a member of that community, I don't get it. So maybe once the trustees and the board got involved in this process, maybe they're not allowed to talk about things or communicate certain things, or then you get the conspiracy theorists. I just want to be clear. If there's good reason for a school in my community to close, I understand that, but I don't get it. And if I don't get it, I think there's a lot of people that are, of course they're going to come up with their own theories of why this is happening. And Bateman was unique in that the population. Like I said, when General Brock merged with Lord Elgin and became Bateman.
And a lot of resources went into making Bateman a unique school in the Halton District School Board.
They sold me. I mean, I changed during this process on my thinking about Bateman and the unique place it has. I didn't look as much at the numbers and the seats and all those things, but I got sold. So I don't know. I feel like when there's not a clear understanding of why these things happen, people get bitter. And I don't want to be a bitter old man. I just want to understand this better.
It's like planning issues with the city. They revamped the whole community engagement process to allow that community engagement, although they're under some restraints by the old OMB, Ontario Municipal Board, but they worked within that framework to allow the communities who had difficulty with planning issues to actually have a say and come up with different solutions. Is that the type of thing that you're looking for, Casey, here?
I think there are certain people that are part of that community, even people that don't have kids at that particular school, that could have been part of a group that might have been able to explore things if they didn't work out, but we might have stumbled upon another way of doing things. There was no time. There was no There was no time, and there was no feedback as to whether this was something that would even be considered. And I'm sorry, I don't feel like
So
a
you
lot.
feel you weren't listened to?
I feel like the delegations were definitely not listened to. I'm sorry,
Amy,
but
that's a real problem that people come away from this process with that opinion.
Yeah, that's, I can tell you my personal, and I can't speak for the other 10 trustees,
course.
but I felt every single word of those delegations. And some of the people that were presented the delegations may have said similar things to other people, but every single word that they uttered, they were speaking from their hearts.
Right.
I cannot think that the other trustees around the table didn't feel the impact, because I know that I certainly did.
Well, but they didn't feel the impact if it was 10 votes to 1 on Bateman. That seems like a done deal.
No, I don't think it was a done deal.
No?
I think that the
Interesting.
I think the trustees weighed the information. They weighed the delegations, they weighed the emails, they weighed the director's report, and they came to their own decisions. No, I did not know how any single person around that table was voting.
And that we're going to have to leave it there at this point, but I hope it didn't discourage anybody from being involved in a process that may or may not be flawed, but you've got to have that community engagement. And I know Bateman is continuing because there are still some doors that are open, so it's not a closed issue with Bateman.
Or with Pearson,
Or
might I add. Yeah.
with Pearson.
they both obviously want to fight for their life. They're passionate people.
And you know something, Casey? This is our last show for the season. We've had a great time on the show this year, and you may have seen some of the slideshow
I wanna do some fun shows.
going on. I'm going to give Amy just a quick, because I'm getting the message to wrap up. So go ahead, Amy.
Thank you. I really wanted the opportunity to thank the people who supported Bateman and who supported me. I received numerous emails and phone calls from people telling me to keep going, and giving me strength and courage to do what I knew I had to do. It was exhausting, emotionally, physically, and intellectually, but I felt the support of the community, and not just the people that live near Bateman, but I felt support from all over Burlington.
And isn't that a wonderful
It
feeling?
was an amazing thing, and they got me through this.
Okay, I thank you for that last little message. I also want to thank Kim Slonwhite from Clear Path Media, who all season has been helpful. Daniel, Faria, and Riley, also volunteers. We have to go. We'll see you next fall here on The Issue. I'm Mark Carr for Kojiko TV, truly local television.